Iran's ambassador to the United Nations is rejecting calls for his country to abandon its uranium enrichment program in a new interview.
The enrichment is our right, an inalienable right, and we want to implement this right. I think that enrichment will not never stop.
He says we'll never stop that enrichment. That's what he says. Those comments come as the UN's nuclear watchdog says he expects Iran could resume enriching uranium, quote, within months. Despite the U.S. dropping more than a dozen so-called bunker buster bombs on Iran's key nuclear sites 9 days ago, including the Fordo facility, where new images into CNN show there is work taking place at the site right now. With us now, Kirsten Fontenrose, the former senior director for the Gulf at the National Security Council, along with Brett McGurk. He's a CNN global affairs analyst and the former Middle East and North Africa coordinator at the National Security Council. Kirsten, let me start with you. What's your assessment of how quickly Iran potentially could be back in enriching uranium?
The IAEA executive director is saying it's within months, but that is debated by the U.S. intelligence community. The CIA director told Congress last Friday he thinks that many of the facilities have been completely dismantled. Remember, we're also hearing from places like scientific seismologists who are saying that the shock waves from the strikes would have taken out much more than even the bombs would have. So when we think about dropping a bunker buster, we think about its impact, but it's more than that. It's also what happens once that bomb hits underground and reacts with the earth around it. So we expect that most of the centrifuges are eliminated. And if you restarted the program, what does that mean? Is that enrichment? Is that a production facility for rotors? Is that fuel? What are you talking about? So yes, they could potentially start something if they were trying to send a signal, but how long would it be before they could make a bomb? Much, much longer. Dirty bomb, shorter timeline. Warhead, much longer timeline, takes multiple facilities and many pieces of the process. But we're assessing right now that the discussion is about whether or not you can talk them out of the intent to restart anyway. Can you give them a civilian program at that same site, and then they don't need to enrich for a bomb at all? Can they even afford to enrich, even if they had remnants of the material to start with? There's so many questions when, instead of just looking at whether or not they have some seed material, look at, do they have the scientists? Do they have the funding? Do they have the intent?
And do they have the guts to do it? Because they know if the Israelis or the U.S. found out about it, they would immediately launch retaliatory strikes. Yeah, so they have to have the guts to do that as well. Brett, let me get your reaction to what the head of the UN's nuclear watchdog agency said about Iran's ability to enrich uranium after those U.S. and Israeli attacks. Watch this and listen.
Some could have been destroyed as part of the attack, but some could have been moved. So there has to be, at some point, a clarification. If we don't get that clarification, this will continue to be hanging, over our heads.
Can the world get that clarification, Brett, unless inspectors are let back into Iran?
I think, well, let's step back. First of all, what I think the Israelis demonstrated in this operation, they have complete intel dominance over Iran. They know where stuff is. About 20,000 centrifuges have been destroyed at Natanz and Fordo. All the centrifuges at Natanz and Fordo, as Kirsten just said, are no longer operable. Does Iran have a stash of centrifuges somewhere else? Maybe, probably not. Centrifuge production facilities are destroyed. So there's a lot of coulds in Raphael's assessment. I know him pretty well. A lot of coulds, a lot of assumptions. Look, Iran has been set back significantly. Ambassador Eravani, which you just showed, he's acting as if the world has not changed with what's just happened. Their nuclear program is set back, some might say months. That's based on a number of assumptions, that Iran cobbles together the pieces and parts that's left of the program and decides to now move with speed and dispatch. I think we would see that. We'd be able to stop it. So let's just kind of wait and see. There were predictions before this happened, when I was on this set about 2 weeks ago. Uncontrollable war in the Middle East, hundreds of American casualties if we entered. None of that happened. I think all of the assumptions that are going on now for what might happen to the program, we just have to take the time, let the intel professionals do their work. They'll come up with a comprehensive assessment, but even then, that'll be based on a number of assumptions. What's Iran prepared to do after this setback? Would we see it? Would we be able to stop it? How will the diplomacy go? So I think we all have to approach this with little humility. This is a successful operation overall. I think Iran is in deep trouble. And I think the idea they're going to now lurch towards moving ahead with their nuclear program, I really think that is implausible. And if they do, we'll see it. And I think we'll have measures to stop it. And the Europeans here, interestingly, the Brits and the French are saying they are prepared to snap back all international sanctions by the end of this summer if Iran does what Ambassador Eravani just said. So there's a lot of tools here in the diplomatic playbook. There's a lot of intelligence going on. And right now, I think this is going fairly well, and we have to see.
Yeah, you've got an important article that I read that has your assessment of what potentially could be unfolding right now, and we'll continue to watch it.
What questions now do you still have following the U.S. bombing of the three of Iran's nuclear facilities?
Well, the fundamental question is the question that we've been debating now for a good part of a week, which is how much of the nuclear program that Iran had before the U.S. strikes is still intact. And when you think about the nuclear program, you're really thinking about three sets of possibilities. One is the knowledge in terms of the scientists, but just the knowledge of how to build nuclear weapons. That knowledge cannot be erased by bombing, so that exists. Number two is material. You can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you can't get your hands on the material, that creates either a nuclear fission or a nuclear fusion device that is a bomb that can actually go off, then it doesn't really matter. Now, it is quite clear from all the evidence that we have seen that the material, at least some of the material that had been enriched to 60%, a very high level of enrichment, not useful for peaceful, only for military purposes, that some, if not all of that material, is still in Iranian hands. With the briefings that were given to the Senate over the last few days, and even Republican senators said, yes, the material was really not being targeted, and therefore, if it's still out there, it will be out there. And then the third is the actual taking that material and enriching it further and making a nuclear weapon out of that. And there we don't know whether there are sufficient numbers of centrifuges that can be either reinstalled or whether they have survived the big strike in Fordo Mountain. But as you mentioned, Rafael Grossi, the IAEA head, has said that he thinks they can start enriching it in a matter of months. In that regard, you're probably back to having a nuclear weapons program of some kind that might be able to have a bomb in a year or two, and that's not that different from what it was before.
Well, have a listen to the head of the UN's nuclear watchdog agency and his comments on how much enriched uranium might be left after the attacks.
Some could have been destroyed as part of the attack, but some could have been moved. So there has to be, at some point, a clarification. If we don't get that clarification, this will continue to be hanging, over our heads.
Is it your feeling that stockpiles were moved ahead of the strikes?
I'd be surprised if they weren't moved. The Iranians knew that will be a key target. It is relatively easy to move, as Mr. Grossi said as well in the last few days. So I think some of the material is still around, and that gives me pause. And it's one of the reasons, by the way, that when other administrations faced the question of whether or not to bomb, they were hesitating. They were hesitating that you could do this in a way that would, in fact, assure the total destruction of a nuclear program. President Trump may be claiming that the program has been obliterated, but all the evidence points to the reality that some form of nuclear capability remains. And there's now a greater incentive to acquire nuclear weapons than there exists before, because frankly, not having a nuclear weapon apparently is not enough to deter either Israel or the United States. At least that will be the calculation in Tehran.
Do you think the public or members of Congress will ever get more evidence or intel about what damage was immediately done?
I think at some point we will know in one form or another, either because a diplomatic path is opened up and the Iranians decide that they are willing to have international inspectors back on the ground to verify what may or may not have been destroyed, or the worst case, Iran demonstrates that it has a nuclear weapon, in which case we know it wasn't obliterated.
Ambassador Ivo Daalder. We'll leave it there for now. Thanks so much for being with us.